Thank you very much. Oh gosh, sorry, I've got too many screens going on at the moment as well. So last up, we have Stephen Scott Bottom from the University of Manchester. So he works in contemporary theatre. So again, another medium that we've not engaged with yet. So it's great to have Stephen along. So he's a facilitator, writer and performer, and has worked extensively with flood-threatened communities in response to flood events. So over to you then, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me. You can't see me because for some reason we had trouble with my camera, and so Joe is kindly running my slides for me because yeah, I'm a voice, but you will see me in some pictures in a minute. So just yeah, just to say, I've put arts. I was asked to talk generally about arts, but I am a theatre maker fundamentally. Oh, we've gone to the first slide. Okay. No, you can go back. It's fine. And some of what I'll talk about has already been covered in one way or another, but I'll just try and pull it together. I hope it doesn't sound, because we've had already some really interesting presentations about different, sketching and photos and all sorts of things. So I'll be focusing primarily on a kind of live performance approach. If we could go to the next slide. One thing I just want to say before I start is that this notion of novel communications should not involve treating the arts as a novelty or as ornamentation. I mean, actually, I say that with caution now, having, we've just seen a great demonstration of how the arts can be used to kind of to jazz up perhaps a quite dry presentation event. But generally, if you're wanting to work with artists, don't just ask them, like, here's my research, I've already figured out what the answers are, I just want you to present it for me, because that is kind of, it ignores the fact that the arts are research disciplines in their own right, whether academically or in terms of professional practitioners. Artists will work from their own sets of questions, which may be the questions that you're asking as well, but they're going to kind of approach it from a different angle, and that's kind of part of the point. Nobody wants to be a ventriloquist dummy. Another point here is that the arts are actually quite poorly suited to messaging in the sense of didactic communication of preconceived points. So again, this comes back to what Joe was saying earlier about the difference between the kind of deficit communication model and the knowledge exchange model. I've too often been in a situation where people have, I've seen people asked, or I've been asked effectively to kind of overcome somebody else's knowledge deficit by being arty. And that's basically not what we're good at. What we're good at is facilitating proper exchanges by kind of creating a range of perspectives on things. One of my favorite playwrights, Edward Albee, who wrote Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, any play that can be summed up in a sentence or two shouldn't be any longer than that. And that's how I feel about any kind of artistic offering, really. So just next slide, please. So if we think of art or performance as a fresh way of looking at things, one way into that thought is just to explain how I began working in Leeds about 5 years ago now. And at that point, I was still living in Leeds, although I live in Manchester now. And I lived there for about 10 years. And I was being asked by people in kind of various agencies there, the Environment Agency, City Council, and so on, to help think through why the city doesn't engage really with its waterfront, with the River Aire as it goes through the middle of the city. And part of the reason is historically, the river has been kind of hidden away behind industrial sites or by blocks of flats now and so on. And so this, I was fairly unfamiliar with it myself at that time. I devised a kind of walking tour in the form of a performance, in the form of a mock public consultation, where essentially as Don Freshwater, you see me there in the shades, I was this guy who claimed to be from the Leeds Redevelopment Corporation, and we were proposing to knock down lots of buildings and redevelop the whole waterfront, and we wanted people's ideas about, what should go. Essentially, you see people kind of, people understood this as a joke because I played this as a kind of, sort of fascist developer, essentially. But we got a lot of history about the waterfront and so on into that, and people really engaged with the kind of the joke and the fun of the process. And lots of people said they have never walked the paths that we took along the river. Now, one of the things that came out of that, I did a specific performance just for people from the Environment Agency, and they realized the main feedback I had there was that they realized that many of them had never walked along the river either, knew nothing about the history of the city and the buildings around the river and the social uses of the place, and actually realized that all they knew was about you know, kind of technical data, flood graphs and so on. And so there was this realization that actually professionals also need to go beyond their own kind of narrow expertise if you want to engage people and engage themselves, if you like, with what's going on in the water sector and the environment. And that led actually to a network group that we ran every month at breakfast time for 2 hours, called the Friends of Fred. So somebody in the group said, what if we thought of the river as Fred, you know, somebody that we all know. And essentially this was a group with really quite senior people from the EA, City Council, Air Rivers Trust, Canal and River Trust, local businesses that have waterfront properties and so on and so forth. And they realized that they often were in the same meetings, but they were always talking slightly at cross purposes because those meetings were always about somebody's agenda. Okay, and what they wanted was a place to come together and just improvise a conversation, as it were, about why they were interested in the river and what it meant to them. And that turned into, unexpectedly, a 3-year-long process, which some of them described as group therapy, which I discovered actually group therapy and improvised drama actually have the same historical roots, so that might not be entirely accidental. Anyway, so, and that's documented in that article you see there. So this is about building relationships and building understandings of multiple ways of looking at the things that you're concerned with. Next slide. Parallel with that process, we're also doing community citizenship building, if you like, in Shipley, which is just 12 miles upstream from Leeds. And particularly we worked in an area which has a big bit of floodplain that you can see there. Beyond the trees in that photograph is the River Aire again, and Saltaire in the distance, if anybody knows the World Heritage Site there. And they had this big piece of unused floodplain just down the hill from this 1950s housing estate, which was regarded as a kind of hard to reach community because it's at the end of a dead end road and so on. And we worked there consistently, and we did a series in consultation with the community. We did a series of interventions in this floodplain. You can see here a kind of maze that we made in long grass in the summer, for example, with objects for people to find and so on. And bit by bit, the community took control of that process to the point where they founded their own residence group, which has now been in existence for 5 years. 2 years after we left, after the project finished, our funded project, they got together the money to put in a properly installed footpath along the riverbank that had been identified as the thing that they wanted most when we started, and they've got it now. There's a wildflower meadow. They're planting trees as a flood measure. So they've really taken possession of their environment from a zero starting point as a result of engaging through conversation and through creative interventions in the landscape. Again, that's documented there but the point here is that it was all improvised. We didn't start out with an agenda. We didn't start out going, right, we must get these people to do X. Instead, it was all about what do these people see and want and need. And that includes that residence group now has also sorted a lot of things about buses and bins and all the other kind of mundane stuff that happens in a community. Next slide. So one of the things that comes out of learning who those people are in the community is an ability to also go to them when something happens. There was a major flood at Boxing Day, as many of you will be aware, in the north of England, 2015, as a result of which I was able to go to people all over the area in Shipley the following year and gathered interview data from them. And as a result, made this piece, which was originally designed as quite a small and intimate piece for the Saltaire Festival to be performed in the park, on part of the floodplain where the water had happened. And as you can see, you know, simple props, a Christmas tree, bolt of cloth to be the river, and so on. And this was really just to kind of perform back the stories of how the flood had affected people to that community. Very interestingly, it turned out that because this piece is mobile and can be taken other places, it's been asked for repeatedly by flood management agencies, insurers, primary schools, actually, because kids can access it as well, because it reminds people of the kind of human impacts, if you like, the human costs of a flood event. And again, what the professionals are telling me, although in theory they know about this stuff, people tend to lose track of the kind of human aspects of this, and so I'm told need reminding of it. So that is again another aspect of this kind of integrated working style. Next. I'm rambling on. And also novel innovations can be communicated. This is quite important part of this. So as a result of these developing conversations, another piece we made in 2016 following the flood in Leeds was a kind of walk around tour where small groups led each other around, and they'd come across different actors on the way who represented different threads. So I've put in a couple of pictures here because it's an NFM event. We had this character called the gardener, who was really emphasizing the kind of impermeability of the city landscape and how it's very difficult to absorb water. And you can see that from this little demo he did with his friendly little tree. And then he took people to the dark arches underneath the station and kind of gestured upstream to the light at the end of the tunnel to, the moorlands and so on at the upper reaches of the air, and talked a little bit about attempts at soft engineering of the landscape to stop so much water coming downstream. The following year, as a kind of accidental result of a conversation with the project manager of for BAM Nuttall, the engineering contractors, who were installing collapsible weirs as a very novel form of flood management innovation in the city centre, where essentially what happens in a high water situation is they deflate these airbags underneath a kind of weir blade, and that lowers the level of the water going through the city centre. And this has never been done in Britain as a flood defence before. And I said to them, it's a shame you can't demonstrate how this works, because it would be really great for people to see it happen, but of course you can only do it when it's actually flooding. And from that we came up with the idea of a replica of this, which BAM Nuttall constructed. You can see it there as kind of small scaled down replica. And we demonstrated this. I was a character called Guy from the council, get it? A lot of people thought I actually was from the council and how creative the council had become in its storytelling. And we followed that up with a tour around the whole site and actually into one of the restricted building sites, because you can see that the construction of this thing was still happening in the background, and people got very engaged with it. And we were told by people from the Environment Agency and so on that they'd never had that degree of engagement with an engineering project before, as what happened that Waterfront Festival as a result of that just really quite simple storytelling around what was actually going on. And so I should probably stop finally, last slide. So finally, also, we coming off the back of that Weir Science project, we also engaged with the first stages of public consultation for the second phase of the Leeds Flood Alleviation Scheme, which does involve natural flood management in the upper catchment, as well as storage facilities going into Leeds and so on. And we were asked to kind of we used various different kind of props and illustrations to engage people with this. We were actually right next to the sort of official Environment Agency table, which had kind of drawings of the sort that you see there in the middle, with the sort of technical map of what was going on. But what happened actually was that generally people became much more engaged with this quite simply drawn, actually this was by a visual minute taker, map of the catchment with the sort of obvious landmarks drawn on. People generally find it easier to engage with that kind of homemade simple graphic of that sort. And also we found we literally weren't given a table that we could use for that purpose. And so it got put on the ground, and you can see that over the course of that afternoon, people were kind of squatting down and engaging physically with the map in ways that were really quite striking. And again, children became involved in the conversation. The guy at the bottom there squatting down is Andy Judson, who was one of the kind of major contractors, and he'd come out from behind the table to engage with people on his knees. So again, sometimes it's simply a matter of thinking about staging for a consultation. Don't just kind of put yourself in a gazebo that people have to come up to and you're barriered by a table. What ways can you find to draw people into a dialogue? Yeah, so this is just to finish off. All of these images are from a few years ago now, because I've been working on a completely different unrelated project for the last couple of years, but I am planning to get back to some of this, and I'm really interested if anybody wants to talk to me about prospective projects going forward where we might kind of have a kind of crossover between the arts and engineering or whatever. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen, for that really interesting talk. I'm afraid we are run over time. I see there are some comments and a question in the chat. So if you would mind just having a quick, can you see the chat, Stephen?
I can. I will try and respond to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Great. So that's the end of our formal presentations and our formal sessions, but we do still have one talk